Okay. No, I'm all right. I'm about to go live.
Oh, we just did. And we're live here on Plus One EXP.
Don't think I'm going to be eating cake.
Bifford, I could drop that link in just 1 second for you. Got link blocks set up. Actually, let me see if I can just give you permission real quick. If there's an easy, nope, there's not an easy way to do that. Hey, my name's Tony Vicinda. I'm Chief Alchemist here at Plus One EXP, which is a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. Typically, what we do is help amazing designers find great players who love their game and help amazing players find great designers who love their games. But today what we're here to do is to raise money or help raise money for a good cause. I'm going to let somebody else tell you a little bit more about that cause in just a second, but it is something that is near and dear to our heart. Also, we've got some great folks on to talk about their experience with the Fighting Fantasy and Advanced Fighting Fantasy game systems, which have had a huge impact not only themselves, but within the independent design scene, especially modernly through other systems that oftentimes seek to emulate a lot of the core of what they do well. So let's go ahead and meet the person one of the people who helped put all this together, and that's going to be Sam Bifford. Sam, tell people who you are, what you do, and tell us a little bit about what we're raising money for today.
Well, I mean, personally, I'm not much of anybody compared to everyone else who's here, so I'm going to take a back seat as much as possible. But I have started, well, I've been working with Orion Games, who does the Advanced Fighting Fantasy game books for quite a while now, proofreading and editing. Recently, I've taken on the mantle of doing a magazine, which is the Warlock Returns. And several of these people helped me to write and do art for that fantastic magazine, which I think people really like. The reason I've set this up today is because I think everyone at some point hits a mental issue where either they come across something that's challenging them and making their life hard, or they've got someone who's close to them that has the same problem. So Mind is a charity in the UK that anyone can turn to, phone up and pop in to speak to someone to talk through things and help to make life, make sense a little bit in their head. So this is to raise money for that. We've got an auction and raffle going on in the background, which we'll come to in a bit. But yeah, we're here to chat about Advanced Fighting Fantasy and Fighting Fantasy, let you know what it's all about if you don't already know, and raise money.
Awesome. There's actually zero reason to bury that lead, so I'm going to get those links all set up. In just a second, the link right below Sam's face will also go straight to the donation link. I just didn't get it set up this morning because I was dealing with some other stuff, and it is only 9 a.m.-ish where I'm at, though it's much later in the day for y'all. Sam, tell us a little bit about kind of the way people can support things. Because, like I said, there's no reason to hesitate on that. If people want to support things right now, I want to give them the chance to do that. So what are some of the things that we've got going on that people can do to help support this great cause?
Okay, if you're just here to help support the charity and you just purely want to donate, then you can go to the Just Giving page that I've set up, which Tony's linked to, and all monies from that will go straight to Mind. If, however, you want to live life on the edge a little bit more, we do have a raffle and auction going on. So most of the items are auction-based, so you pledge and the highest person at the end of the whole proceed will walk away with that item. We've got such things as the Keep of the Lich Lord, which has been signed by the authors who are in the chat today. Lots of other books. We've got a figurine, which has been donated by Scriptarium and painted by one of Julian's friends, very talented artist. And there's other items as well. And then on the raffle side of things, you can buy raffle tickets for 5 different items. And then at the end, depending on the item, either one person can win that item or a couple of people can. And but it means that you can get something that's brilliant for just a couple of pounds.
Awesome. And I popped this up on the stream next to us. We'll talk about some of the items as we go through. We'll pull a few up and kind of highlight them. Let Sam tell us a little bit more about why you might be excited about them. I'll get links in there in just 1 second for everybody as well. But let's go ahead and meet some of the alumni that we have on helping talking with us today about this great cause and about their experiences with Final Fantasy, Advanced Final Fantasy, and working on the Warlock Returns. We're just going to work across the stream. Let's start with Stuart. Stuart, why don't you tell people who you are, what you do? If you want to plug anything, tell people where to find you online. That's great. And then tell us a little bit about your experiences with Fighting Fantasy, Advanced Fighting Fantasy.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm Stuart Lloyd. I've written a blog called Lloyd of Game Books for the last 10 years or so, on and off. I've just got back into it. So that's what I do. I've got a few things on Itch and Drive Through that pay what you want or free. And I also have some advanced fighting fantasy stuff I've made for free, which you can find. Well, you can find on the forums or put on my blog. So my experience with fighting fantasy. So my first fighting fantasy book I got when I was 7 in a school raffle called Talisman of Death, which is I'm sure everyone appreciate that. Actually, I'm going to say Talisman of Death.
Yeah, Talisman of Death. I will let you live, Stuart, because of that.
Thank you. We discussed this before that we have to say it like that. So, which I loved. It sort of sent me to a whole new world. And then I got Advanced Fighting Fantasy, the original one when I was 11, the Dungeoneer book, and. And then when Advanced Fighting Fantasy 2nd edition came out, I was very excited because it was new and they'd fixed a lot of problems from the original one. And I've written a few blog posts about how the first edition could be pretty broken, basically because some people could have a skill of 12 and some people could have a skill of 7. And and then went from there. And I've just written I wrote a load of Advanced Fighting Fantasy stuff. There's some stuff I've written in the Warlock Returns. It is things about jungle settings, things you could do when you're doing a jungle adventure. So there you go. And it's been released bit by bit in the Warlock Return so far. So that's me.
Awesome. Super excited to have you with us. Excited to chat with you a little bit also too as we go through. We just keep on working across. Let's hear next from Dave. Dave, tell people the same things. Who you are, what you do, if you got anything you want to plug, but also tell us a little bit about your experience with Fighting Fantasy and Advanced Fighting Fantasy.
Okay. I kind of a near miss with Fighting Fantasy because I was nearly the co-author of number 11 or something in the series. Oliver Johnson and I were going to do The Lord of Shadow Keep, which was advertised in the back of Sorcery, I think, as Fighting Fantasy number 11. But we got our own series over at Grafton Books, so we took it there. More for creative control than for money, has to be said. And then much later, I came back with, is it number 44 or 45? The Keeper
43.
Lord, Jamie and I did. So I nearly had one.
Now, Dave, it should have been Lord of Shadow Keep. Yeah. It should be Keep of the Lich Lord.
But so we basically I nearly had one of the very first non-Ian and Steve books, and actually in the end had one of the last. So kind of I'm spuriously here, I think, as having written half of one Fighting Fantasy book, but it is in the auction. So
there we go.
That justifies it.
And we are going to look super bizarre on screen for just a second as we have another guest join us and I get things shuffled around as part of that process. But Dave, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Let's slide over to the man with the voice. We got Jamie. Jamie, tell people who you are, what you do.
Greetings, wormlings. I am the Dark Lord. Oh, no, sorry. Life, 30 years of writing game books and fantasy sometimes gets too much for me and I can't handle reality. Anyway, I started life working on White Dwarf magazine at Games Workshop way back in the 80s. And then I started helping Ian and Steve a bit with original Fighting Fantasy early on. And then they left, they sold the Games Workshop. And I went off and wrote my own stuff. I'd done Talisman of Death, which is set in the world of Orb, which actually had rather a cool map of the whole of Orb. And then I went off and did Way of the Tiger. And then Dave and I did Sword of the Samurai, 22, Fighting Fantasy 22 or 21, I think. And then Talisman of Keep of the Lich Lord with Dave, my minion. He doesn't accept that he's a minion, but he is. And then Dave and I wrote the first, I think it's the first, the open world game books with no single linear story, but you have a whole set of books that you can travel across between, exploring as you go, and with all sorts of different character classes, and it's like a role-playing game in book form. And some of those are signed and available on the auction if you want. And then recently I worked computer games, and with Ian and Steve still worked for them at IDOS on the Death Trap Dungeon computer game, which actually wasn't really the way I would have done it, but I joined later and did a lot of writing on it. It was done in the style of Tomb Raider. I think it should have been done more. It was done as a third-person action adventure thing, and it didn't really capture the essence of fantasy role-playing, I thought. Anyway, I was paid to write stuff, so I wrote it to the best of my ability, of course. And the Korean computer games and everything. And Dave and I recently gone back to game books. We've written a new series called the Vulcanverse Game Books, and it's all kind of Greek mythology, which actually is kind of refreshing after all of the goblins and the sub-Tolkien stuff. It's quite nice to get our teeth back into the source material, as it were, of the Greek myths, because they're so rich and powerful. And for a while I had a column in the original Warlock magazine way back when, and now the Warlock returns to spread the message of evil. I also wrote a bunch of kids' books along the way too, which is why I do the Dark Lord shtick. It's all about, Sauron goes to school in England. He gets cursed into the body of a 13-year-old boy and has to go to school. Anyway, that's me writing for so many years.
Awesome.
Just waiting before death finally gives me the peace I need.
Awesome.
Perhaps you'd like to meet one of my other little friends. This is the ultimate fate for Dave Morris. He will become like my minion Spectre. And then
I don't know why that's reminded me, but by the way, I've just got to remind you
I
that
have all
Ian
sorts of things like that.
currently has COVID, so it'd be good to send him a best wishes, I think.
To who?
Hasn't Ian got COVID at the moment?
But I just saw his enemies and he's recovering.
Okay.
But the final thing I wanted to say about is, I don't know whether he's going to get a long COVID or not, but back in the 90s, game books kind of dried up and I didn't have anything to do, and my marriage fell apart and my career went down a bit, and I became very clinically depressed and suicidally depressed for a while, and because I'd had too much success too young, and I just thought it was easy, whatever the reasons are. Anyway, it happens to all of us, mental health issues. So it's kind of more important to me in a way to help to support a charity like Mind, having, and I didn't use Mind then, but I had lots of help in England to help get me through it, because it can happen to anyone, even a successful writer like me. You can have serious mental health issues, and we need to do more to help people who fall into that kind of trouble. So that's why I'm here, really. I wouldn't bother normally. God, wouldn't hang out with these worms. Maybe I'd keep Corporal Hicks. Yes, they're not worthy. Dave's brain I'm going to put in a jar. It'll be easier to deal with. I might keep Corporal Hicks because he'll be useful when the aliens attack. And maybe I'll need a French alliance, so perhaps Julian will be allowed to live. Stuart is useful. Thanks. The Lloyd of Game Books will let him live. The others, I'm afraid, are all doomed unless you send me some Texan boots and hats, Tony.
We can probably make that work.
Texan steaks, actually.
Texan steaks. There we go. Let's talk to Corporal Hicks himself. Jonathan, do you want to tell people who you are, what you do, and your connection to this system and these people?
Yeah, well, I'm Jonathan Hicks. I started reading fighting fantasy in 1983. I got my first book through the Puffin Book Club, bless them, and got Citadel of Chaos. So with that mad staring cat on the front.
Jonathan, yeah. Citadel of Chaos.
I do apologise, Citadel of Chaos. And it was, and that just got me hooked because I was already a massive Tolkien fan. I'd done the Radio 2 drama, read the books, read The Hobbit, read what I could, watched the Ralph Bakshi cartoon. And then when this came, I wanted to be more involved with it. So I was writing my own stories because I was young and quite naive. So, but when this came along, this was a whole new way of doing things. And then a year later, I discovered the Red Box Basic Dungeons and Dragons, and that was it. That was my role playing. Just took off from there. It took me years to understand what I was doing, but such was the nature of role playing back in the 80s. But yeah, Fighting Fantasy game books I collected. I got them as soon as they came out. Sadly, I used to have the full collection of those bookmarks that were coming with them, but they got lost in the move along with many other things. But yeah, I collected all the books. And then my role-playing hobby overtook my game book hobby. And like Jamie said, in the 90s, they were starting to wane a little bit. So I focused mainly on role-playing. What I did use I used to have the Fighting Fantasy introductory role-playing game. And whenever I started a new person in the hobby, that was the game I would use because it was quick, it was simple, it was intuitive. And because they were fantasy fans, the chances are that they'd actually read a Fighting Fantasy game book. So that was the rules sorted out straight away. So it was always present throughout all my gaming. And then I started to get into writing articles. And then I got my first article accepted in 1997 by Arcane magazine, which actually folded before they published the article, which was a bit annoying. I didn't even get paid. So, yeah, a few years later, I then started writing for computer games. That was what I wanted to do. I wrote a mobile game for the new Battlestar Galactica, the reimagined one. That was in the sort of the early 2000s. And nothing really came of that. I didn't really follow that up. And then I got into writing articles, interviewing important people, doing reviews in the role-playing game market. And then I started game design in about 2009, 2010. And I just sort of messed with it, wasn't really playing with it. And then to get onto the mental health track, a few years ago, I had a severe anxiety attack. And I thought it was a heart attack. And so I spent a little bit of time recovering from that. And trying to understand what I'd done that I'd done to me physically and mentally. And as with most mental health, especially many mental health, I didn't actually own up to it. It was just something that had happened, and it's just time to move on. So I didn't address it at all ever. But recently, I've been coming out a little bit more, trying to talk a bit more about myself, and it's charities like mine that really, really help with that kind of stuff. And then a few years ago, after I thought I had a life-threatening moment, which turns out I didn't, but there you have it. I got into games design, and I went back to Advanced Fighting Fantasy for Marion Games, and I decided that I wanted to do a science fiction version of it. Started writing State of Adventures, and then I had a few issues, again linked to mental health issues, so I couldn't actually finish the project. And then a year later, Graham Blockley, bless him, came back and said, "I'll finish writing it. I'll give you credit on the cover." I went, "Yeah, go for it. I don't mind at all. I've already written quite a lot." So he finished the book, put it out there. The response was absolutely fantastic. So I thought, what else can I do? So I wrote a couple of adventures for Advanced Fighting Fantasy. I wrote the Floating Dungeon of Arrakis Lur. That was my first one, which is actually being translated into French at the moment through Scriptarium. And yeah, and that was fantastic. So I was really happy about that. So I wrote another one, and I wrote another one. And then before I know it, I've written an entire role-playing game called Those Dark Places, which got published by Osprey Games. That went out. Started designing more. Started writing for Dragon Warriors. I wrote The Cursed King for that, which is still yet to be released. And yeah, basically everything I loved about my childhood started to sort of help me, basically, and sort of lifted me up. And I kind of remembered what it was like to be kid and excited again about gaming. And that's what I've been doing for the last couple of 3 years.
Love it.
Cool. What's the Dragon Warriors one called?
The Cursed King. It's set in Thuland, so it's going to have a kind of a Nordic. I do apologise. The Cursed King. Right. So it's going to have that kind of Nordic kind of Viking feel to it.
Awesome.
And cool. That is one of the items that's available in the auction once it comes out, and it'll be signed by the author, the editor, and the artist.
Great. I remember my first ever Dragon Warriors character. And I called him Dust Ibn Liner, I'm afraid. It was terrible. And he was like a Tashim.
Dragon's character was called Jam Donut.
Yeah.
You did all right there.
Oh, right. So it was a terrible joke, but he was like a what do you call it? Janissary type. So he'd been kidnapped as a kid. So he was sort of red haired and then became a Tashim assassin.
Graham, I know that you are currently muted. I don't know if you are able to unmute and talk to us or not. But in the meantime, we're going to hop over to Julian. Julian, why don't you tell people who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your connection to Fighting Fantasy.
Yes. So for me, it's a bit intimidating because I'm a nobody compared to all people here.
That's all right, Julian. Everyone is a nobody compared to me. Except perhaps my Dark Master.
Definitely don't have as much experience. I actually discovered Dungeoneer about 10 years ago, about it at my local library for 50p. They were getting rid of loads of books, and I bought this book for 50p, and I was really taken by it. I had played games like Pathfinder, Dungeon and Dragon, and I thought that Dungeoneer was amazing. Nothing, believe it or not, about fighting fantasy. I had never heard of it. So I discovered advanced fighting fantasy before fighting fantasy, which is, I think, quite unusual for people. And then I discovered Iron Game and the second edition of Advanced Fighting Fantasy. And I loved it as well. I just loved the game system. And then I tried to find out a bit more about what happened in France about fighting fantasy, and I discovered it was very popular, and they translated Advanced Fighting Fantasy quite late, about maybe 10 years ago. So originally they translated the fighting fantasy books, but Dungeoneers and Blind and all that never got translated in the 90s. It only translated quite late. And what they came up with is so the translation, the French translation, the core rule book from Graham Botley, and they've done an amazing job. So they kept some of the original illustration, but they also included some illustration from an amazing illustrator called Gidus. I don't know if some of you know him. He did some maps of Titan, which I'm going to show off quickly. One of those, they're beautiful. So when you buy they get 5 maps like these ones, and they're in color. They're just amazing. Unfortunately for you, it's in French. But it's really good stuff. So some of the stuff is new compared to Iron Games. The core rule book includes an adventure. You could even call that a campaign, which is about 100 pages long, which is currently being translated in English. I think Graham has got a contract with Scriptorium to translate some of the French stuff, because there's loads of stuff, and it's a brilliant adventure. It makes references to the Citadel of Chaos. Sorry, I'm not saying it as well as Jamie.
Citadel of Chaos.
Citadel of Chaos.
Thank you.
It's Citadel in French is Citadel.
Sorry?
Sorry. Go on. I was just thinking what Citadel was in French. I think it's Citadel.
La Citadel,
the French word.
I'm not really good French title, but I think it's La Citadelle du Chaos. I don't know what that sounds for you. But yeah, it includes that. Forest of Doom. So they try to include some of the original fighting fantasy books in the campaign. There's also another campaign included in the Titan book, and there's a book that came out recently, which I think is being translated as well, called Cursed Treasures, which is quite a thick book, which is about pirates. It takes place on is it the Black Ocean? Dark Ocean? I'm not too sure, but it's near the... It's using some of the fighting fantasy books as a reference, and it's really good. And I think it's being translated as the moment. So what I've tried to do, to link a bit the English and the French version to show all the good stuff that's going on. So I've translated some stuff from English into French, and I've translated some stuff from French into English. And thanks to Sam, who's been very welcoming with the Warlock Returns. I've translated some of the stuff from Scriptarium in the Warlock Returns. They've added loads of extra rules, so including new races. So you can become a Sleek now. You can become, what else is in there? Rhino people have been done as a player character. And that's it. But I'm nothing compared to all the people who are here today. But I'm just trying to promote a bit Scriptarium because I think they're doing an amazing job. There's actually 2 items on the auction from Scriptarium. One of them is a Yastromo miniature, which have been, I think Sam mentioned it, which has been painted by Justin Curtis, who's an amazing painter.
It is beautifully painted.
Yeah, it's brilliant what he's done. And there's also some original illustration by Gidus, who did quite a lot of illustration in the Titan book. And I think there's a couple of illustrations which are available for the auction. So I've bid for it, and I'm really hoping to get those because they look amazing.
Yeah. I can talk a bit about its origins because I was working at a company called Games Workshop in the UK, which was run by these 2 chaps, Ian Livingston and Steve Jackson UK, and they'd set up it's a bunch of shops, and they'd got the Dungeons and Dragons license, and how they got that license is another story. Perhaps if there's time, I'll tell you about that, which is quite amazing. So they got the European distribution rights for Dungeons and Dragons in the UK, and which they'd done by going over to the States, and anyway, that's another story. So they had this distribution warehouse place in London, and a bunch of shops, and they supplied all the shops, and they were gamers themselves, and so they came up with this system of interactive role playing. So it's solo role playing, where you have a paragraph structure, usually 400. And any given paragraph 33 might say, you walk into the chamber of the Goblin King. In the corner, you see him waiting for you. Do you have the sword of goblin slaying? Turn to paragraph 45. If you have Corporal Hicks as your companion, throw him in the way so he can be slain by the Goblin King while you flee. Turn to paragraph 101. Yeah. If you have the boots of Vizinda, you may flee at any time. Go to paragraph 250. But there was a little basic. It was much simpler than Dungeons and Dragons because it was kind of aimed at in those days at kids, 11, 12-year-old kids, and it was also very violent, which kids loved. And the system was really simple. So you just have skill, which is a number from 2 to 12 that you randomly roll, and stamina, pretty much. And then a lot of books came along. People added new systems to that, like honor or fear or things like that.
Well, luck was one right from the start.
Luck, of course, I'd forgotten luck. Yeah, so there were 3 stats, just 3 stats. luck, stamina, and skill, and you had to roll dice against them. So it was a little game that you played on your own. Kids absolutely loved it, and they immediately went into the top 5 book sales in Britain, and then all over the world. They were translated all over the place.
I think it's interesting as to why there was a difference in America. I think what happened was America got the 2 forms of game book earlier, because you had Choose Your Own Adventure, but you also had, like Steve Jackson US did the pre-fantasy trip. He did Melee and Wizard, and
yes,
things like Death Test, and they were very gamey. So I think what you had was the kids' game book, Choose Your Own Adventure.
And they were also
obvious.
In America they had some solo D&D modules that had that paragraph structure, but you used the
and Tunnels and Trolls, of course.
Tunnels and Trolls also had its solo RPG. So it was not that Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson invented them, but they adapted old ones, simplified them, and also polished them up and made them available for a mass
What you were saying, which was really clever, was because they really, really made it a very simple system. Whereas Tunnels and Trolls and Death Test and all of those were, you had to be a hobby gamer to enjoy them. But Steve and Ian took the idea of, what about an 10 or 11-year-old kid? Let's make something that they could enjoy.
And interestingly, at Games Workshop, they would import all sorts of games from all over the world to sell in their shops, including Steve Jackson US. And one time, Steve Jackson US came over. I met him a couple of times. But one time he was there in the office, and he just discovered Final Fantasy. He went off and he wrote, I think it was Scorpion Swamp.
He did. He wrote one just to make things more
confusing. Because it's really difficult, because it's Steve Jackson on it. It's like, which one is that? So he wrote Scorpion Swamp. He started writing it in the Games Workshop office, because he came over and loved it so much. He
used, because in the Death Test and things like that, you could go back. Because I remember playing Warlock when it came out and thinking, this is weird. You go down a corridor, you can't come back down that corridor, But when Steve Jackson US did Scorpion Swamp, he made it possible for you to backtrack. You could go anywhere in the swamp at any time.
Did he use code words?
I don't think so. No.
He just said, if you have been to this clearing before, turn to a new section.
Right.
Okay. So we can still claim to be the inventors of code words.
I don't know.
The first ones. And to use them extensively in Fabled Lands, like we did anyway. So then I was working as assistant editor on White Dwarf, and I remember writing Talisman of Death with my mate Mark Smith, and there was a thing on the news, BBC News, which is the biggest news thing at that time in the 80s, where people were complaining about violence for kids. So they had Death Trap Dungeon, Talisman of Death, and House of Hell. At least I can understand why some people might have objected to House of Hell, because you win by allowing a young woman to be sacrificed. But anyway, in Talisman of Death, there's this little scene where you set off a trap in the sewer, and the harpoon is thrust through your bed, and your guts are spilled on the sewer floor, and you die horribly. And so they read this out, and they also said that a boy had complained about having nightmares from reading Talisman of Death, because it's full of the minions of death, and it's quite horrific. And of course, the next day, sales shot up of all of the books, because the boys, mostly it was boys in those days, but it's not true anymore. It's much more of many more women are joining.
Of course, that boy's a shivering wreck today, just to get it.
Yes, yeah. But
it was me. No.
So it kind of, the whole thing sort of backfired, and that was one of the things that they loved about it, because it's all about writing for children. It doesn't work if you treat them as children, like it's a kid's book. They like to be treated as adults.
Yeah.
And also it was fantasy violence, and to be honest, by modern standards, it was really quite mild, and it was just, Dungeons and Dragons type role-playing stuff. So whatever the reason is, it's hard to pin down, but it's a combination of the right thing at the right time. Kids were really ready for that sort of fantasy.
Yeah.
And it took off into the mass market mainstream. Everywhere except perhaps America, in fact.
Yeah, it was in the U.S. A big part of it was the satanic panic suppressed the spread of D&D tremendously, but Choose Your Own Adventure books were not associated with that in any way, shape, or form, and so that was a huge part of what allowed them to flourish. But I will say this: I will play fighting fantasy as an adult and thoroughly enjoy it. Choose Your Own Adventure books as a child felt ridiculous and not enjoyable, because it was like, oh, the first time this is kind of clever, but after you've just died the millionth time having no sense of control. Like, one of the brilliant things the books for fighting fantasy did was give you a sense of control by having stats and having rolls and having other things that you did that where player choice mattered, as opposed to just essentially luckily rolling through, like, you know, picking the right option to not die or in the book early, right? And so, which now is looped around. Choose Your Own Adventure has its own board game that's now come out around it, but that's not why we're here. And so you don't need to go into that. No, I just think it's such a tremendously interesting thing. It's something that I think about regularly. I think about the influence that fighting fantasy, the books, the system, and AFF have within the scene that a lot of people in the States and in other parts of the globe are not as familiar with. And I always just think it's tremendously interesting to dive into. It's
interesting that, because out of America came Dungeons and Dragons,
right?
And without D&D, you wouldn't have had fighting fantasy.
Yeah.
And yet it didn't really. I mean, one of the things I remember just in passing was Dave and I had done, I think it was the 4th Fabled Lands book in the 90s, and it was called Devils and Howling Darkness. Yeah. And we had to change it because the American market wouldn't they won't accept devils.
I went to the publishers and had an argument almost for all day with the publisher because we wanted to use this quote from Marco Polo: "Beyond the Great Wall is nothing but devils and howling darkness." And
devils and howling darkness.
And they were saying, no, we can't have devils. And it was this kind of spillover from the Satanic Panic. But that makes no real sense in Europe because we just don't really have that kind of fundamentalist Christian tradition on such a...
No, because in Europe, Satan is our true master anyway. So,
but in the end, they phoned up a big distributor, WH Smith, a big news agent over here, and they said, oh, if it's got devils in the title, we'll take 5,000 fewer copies. So we just had to bow to pressure. We made it the Plains of Howling Darkness. And when we republished it, actually, we should have changed the title back.
Yeah, we just forgot
everybody. So.
Yeah. Awesome. So Volks Minis in chat says here in Brazil they have a huge fan and player base for FF also too, which is great to hear. One of the things I'd love to hear from everybody is maybe have everybody go through and maybe pick 2 in case somebody else takes yours. But what items within the auction for Mind are you most excited about seeing get to somebody, or have you secretly bid on in hopes that no one else outbids you, and just kind of do a little bit of a feature on that, and maybe come back and talk a little bit more about the transition from fighting fantasy to advanced fighting fantasy, because I'll be honest, I don't know what it is. So, but let's talk about those items first. If y'all want to pick a couple items, I want to remind everybody, and I'll drop the links in the chat again in just 1 second. And that is that you can support things in 2 great ways. You can go bid on things in the auctions if you want that competitive spirit. If you want to get maybe you think about it as investing in mental health, but also investing in your game shelf. Or if you want to donate directly, you can donate directly at the link at the bottom of the screen. ttrpg.link /mind will take you straight to the just a straight donation link. I'll drop both of those in the chat in just 1 minute. We'll go around kind of in the opposite order that we did before. So Julian's going to get first shot at not having any of his items stolen. You also don't have to say the item you really, really want. You can feature 2 other items and just hope that nobody swoops in on your item also too. So Julian, what's something that you've got your eye on for the auction?
I've actually for quite a few things. For me, the yes structure looks really, really nice. I'm not going to lie. It's brilliant that Justin has done for it. And as I've said before, the illustrations from Jidus for, I think that's the first campaign that Scriptarium has released for Advanced Fighting Fantasy. So there's a North picture, and there's also, I think, the campaign that they wrote in the core rule book was based, although it's based in a Citadel of Chaos and Forest of Doom, it's mainly based, in the book that was written by Steve Jackson, the novel. What was it called again? Trolltooth Wars?
Oh yeah, Trolltooth Wars. Yeah.
And one of the picture is a Nihilus archer I don't know if you remember that from the novel, and you can see that actually. You can see a preview of the picture. So this guy, which doesn't have any eye, and somehow manages to fire arrows. So for me, that's two big ones, but I think I went for the John Capsalis front covers as well that he did for the Warlock Returns. And I've got to admit, shame on me that I don't know Fablelands very well, but I've did it for that because sorry, but
You'll be burnt alive as a heretic.
But I know that I don't know if Scripterium has been doing some work translating that as well. I don't know if it's a Scripterium or another French company. As I've said, I don't know enough about gaming books, but I keep discovering new books. But there's so many stuff. But for me, that would be the miniature illustration from Jesus.
Awesome. Excellent. Let's keep on going here about some other cool stuff. By the way, I'll just say this: like, if you're somebody watching this and you're like, maybe you're not as versed on certain things of these as you are. I love just getting art from amazing game books, and there's a crap ton of amazing art in this auction. So, if you're somebody watching this who loves fighting fantasy, advanced fighting fantasy, you're gonna find a ton of stuff you love. If you're like, I don't know what I would bid on, go look at the art in this thing, and it's just tremendous. Or take a deep dive into some great fighting fantasy stuff with some of these pieces, knowing that the money you're offering is going to help support mental health services for folks in need. Let's head over to Jonathan. Jonathan, you can't just recommend the stuff that you have put into the auction or that you have drawn.
I can't.
So in
that case, then move on to somebody else. Well, I'll tell you what I am looking at. Of course, like you said, the artwork. I always like a lovely bit of original or print artwork on my walls, and the John Capsalis stuff is absolutely fantastic. I am also looking at the raffle of the Yazdromo edition resin figure because it's Yazdromo, and as a kid, he was one of my heroes. The Fabled Land stuff, it looks absolutely fantastic.
Of course it is.
Of course it does. I'm ashamed to say that I don't own any Way of the Tiger books. So
there's going to be a lot of burnings.
Yeah.
Or as the Norse call them, in-burnings. Yeah. Burn you out of your homes.
So I'm looking at that. But yeah, it is an excellent selection. It really, really good. But out of everything, yeah, the Capsalis art for sure. Because, they're just wonderful, aren't they? But those commissioned really pencil drawings are very old school fighting fantasy, and they are wonderful to look at. So yeah, the artwork especially it all looks absolutely fantastic.
Awesome.
Can I add, Julien, that you can buy all of the French translations of Fabled Lands from Alkonost?
That's the one, yeah. And I think there's a link between Scripterium and...
Sorry, let me rephrase that. Julien, you must buy all of the French Fabled Lands or die.
I'm afraid we haven't done a Scottish edition yet, though, have we?
Oh, we should do. Of a hideous haggis monster.
Yeah. In Gaelic. No, in the style of Rabbie Burns.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's hear. I have 3 computer monitors, and sometimes they're not enough. Let's hear next from JV. JV, what do you have your eye on?
Obviously, I want to buy back my. No, I suppose I don't really want to buy back my own books. They are obviously the best. I think perhaps Jonathan Hicks's sketches, so I could burn them.
Oh! Either way, I don't want them anymore. Anyway.
Until he buys Way of the Tiger books. And similarly with the French, I probably want. It's so beautifully painted, the Yazdromo one. I probably want to have that.
It's lovely.
And then there's a Dragon Warriors one that looks quite cool. Might be fun to burn that in front of both Corporal Hicks and Dave Morris. Maybe satisfying. Or maybe I'll buy the Nightmare book just to rip it up in front of him. I already regret putting money into the latest Bloodsword project to help my mate Dave. I should have. Foolish of me. Well, no, actually, they will send me a full-on copy eventually, which Dave will have to sign. So I thought that would be amusing. Yeah, sign it to me.
Speaking of which, Dave, how about you? What do you have your eye on in the?
Well, that's a good question because I actually don't have the list in front of me at the moment. But let's not, let that stop me from suggesting. If it were in there, I would say, and this is perhaps going a bit off topic, that amongst the advanced Final Fantasy stuff, I think the Riddling Reaver was particularly good.
Yeah.
And if that's not in the auction, people should just go to find it somewhere. It's probably going for hundreds of pounds now. But done by a couple of guys that we know very well, Steve Williams and Paul Mason, who used to be in our role-playing group. And that's I think they really did a big campaign that worked very well. And also, I can't remember if they worked together on things like Mage Hunter, but Paul certainly did Mage Hunter, which he wrote shortly after we went to see Warlock, the Julian Sands movie, and we both enjoyed that. Basically, it's Terminator, but done with a medieval witch rather than an android from the future, but the same plot. And we so enjoyed it.
Century, no, it's Richard E. Grant is the witch hunter from the 17th century comes to the modern world. Yeah,
it's good fun. And so shortly after that, he had the idea for doing that. And I think after we saw Chinese Ghost Story, he then did, it was either Slaves of the Abyss or Crimson Tide.
Slaves,
so anyway, I'm sure they're not in the auction, but I just remembered those as.
But if you don't tell the GM what you want, how will they know what to put in the future?
Right? Yeah.
I think all the actual game books are by you and me, aren't they? I think.
Are they?
Yeah.
Oh, well.
It's Stuart.
Only the worth. They're the only ones worth having, aren't they?
Stuart, same question to you.
Okay, so yeah, I'm loving the art. I think my favorite at the moment is the goblin with the spiky sort of shoulder pads. He's looking very pleased with himself. I don't know.
It's like a classic FF picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or Way of the Tiger, in fact, similar to some Way of the Tiger goblins.
He just looks really happy. I'm glad he looks like he's having a great time, whatever he's doing. So good on him or her. I'm not sure. Anyway, but so that's the art I'm after. So other things. So I noticed there's Jamie Fry's got something on the raffle. I do have the stuff he's got, but Jamie Fry's like he collects a lot of Fighting Fantasy stuff, and he's sort of like he's got a wide collection. So if you're around to want to start yourself off on Fighting Fantasy, that'll be a good thing to go in for, because you got Warlock, and then you got, which is the first one, and then Assassins of Alancia, which is sort of a recent one, and then a delightful House of Hell postcard. So I don't know what kind of message you're sending someone if you send someone a House of Hell postcard. It's like, wish you were here so you can untie me from the altar.
Wish you were here so that I can sacrifice you so that I can win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's good. It's good to support that. And then, there is just too much stuff. I mean, The Sorcerer's Isle's got a special place in my heart. It's the first Nightmare book I read, and I loved Nightmare as a kid. Yes, brilliant. I don't know. I don't know if our American friends actually have a Nightmare equivalent, which is obviously what you do is you get 4 children, you make one of them put a helmet over one kid's head so he can't see or she can't see, and then you send them off into a dangerous dungeon, which is brilliant. But
on TV, it was a TV show in the 80s.
Yeah, to be clear.
That didn't literally.
Not just down the local quarry.
It was past time. Yeah.
Got my neighbour's kids. What kids have you got? I've got neighbours. Put the hood on. Oh, where's my daddy?
It's a rite of passage.
Good point. Exactly. But no, it's brilliant because all of the Nightmare games came with a little novel as well. So this one's about the Holy Grail, both the game and the small novel. Correct me if I'm wrong on anything, Dave.
No, that's correct, I think. Yeah.
So
remember.
Oh, brilliant. I love that. And then, well, of course, since it's Advanced Fighting Fantasy, if you want to add to your collection, then if I hadn't got all the books already, I would have bet on the Advanced Fighting Fantasy bundle. But yeah, so the very happy looking goblin, and then the Fighting Fantasy collector things, and then and then if I hadn't had if I didn't have the Sorcerer's Isle and the Advanced Fighting Fantasy stuff, but there we go. Yeah.
Sam, I know you helped curate all these things. You have a favorite?
The Nightmare book has been sitting kind of glaring at me. I've left it in its plastic so that I'm not tempted to open it and read it, because I loved Nightmare as a kid. The one part of the whole program, because it was a kids program on TV, that sort of stuck with me was their lattice work grid over a chasm. So you had to, the three people back in the display board had to send their person with the mask on across this lattice work grid without them falling down a gap and to their doom. And that stuck with me. So yeah, the Nightmare book probably is my go-to wish if I could keep anything back and not give it to anyone that's bid on it.
So you now installed a lattice grid in your own hallway. And for those guests who come who you don't really like, you don't warn them that
it's not for the guests, it's for the kids. And then I would love to have the A3 commissioned pencil drawing. That would be fantastic to be able to say, look, this is my character, draw it for me, please.
Yeah,
that's actually one of the raffle items.
Who's going to draw that?
That is by our very talented Matthew Dewhurst. Right, yeah. He's done some of the drawings for the latest Arian Games books, but I mean, yeah, they're brilliant pictures. So that would be fantastic up on my wall. But yeah, John Capsalis's watercolors and drawings are also fantastic. So you can't go wrong with one of those up on the wall either.
Awesome. Well, while we've been in here, I've bid on a couple things and got a couple raffle tickets, also too. So, a lot of things that have already been mentioned, but I noticed there was an unbid upon Jonathan Hicks piece of art, so I went ahead and made sure that one got bid on.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So much of the art in here is just absolutely stunning. And the best way to win is to not have anybody who's competing against you yet. And so make me lose, folks. And so if you are just joining us, we've been sitting here chatting with some of the folks who help with Warlock Returns or who have been helping with Final Fantasy sometimes for decades. Very excited to sit down with them and talk about this amazing system, also how mental health realities have impacted their own life, what their experiences have been, and it's just been such a great thing. I think a lot of the times, a lot of people don't necessarily consider the impact that mental health has on all of us. And I loved each of you, as you shared, talking about the normal reality of this is a thing that we are all going through, but there are some people who don't have access to services, who don't have access to support, and organizations like Mind help make sure that they do. So it's absolutely great to have you joining us. If you are, I'm going to drop some links in the chat again in just 1 second. So you can either go give directly if you want to at the link down at the bottom of the screen, or you can go bid on one of the amazing charity auction devices that they have. I do want to thank everybody for their time. Before we go, I'd love to hear, again, this is something, Fighting Fantasy, Advanced Fighting Fantasy, my experience is just with the chat books as a system, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about the transition to Advanced Fighting Fantasy before we go, even though I'm sure I could just Google that information. I'd love to hear from some of y'all. What are, maybe, like, Stuart, I feel like we haven't heard from you as much as I'd love to. Do you have any thoughts on some of the differences between Advanced Fighting Fantasy and Fighting Fantasy? And then everybody else can correct anything you get wrong.
Yeah. Which will happen a lot. So yeah, if you pick up a Fighting Fantasy book, chances are, as Dave and Jamie said earlier, you have 3 stats: skill, stamina, and luck. You're probably a fighter, and your skill has a very wide range between 7 and 12, which I think can cause some problems in some books. It might be safe to say. So in Advanced Fighting Fantasy, firstly, it's a points buy system, so you can't have the wild range of difference, and you can do lots of different magical things. So you could do wizard magic, which is shooting firebolts and various other things that uses magic points, or you could be a priest, which is a more kind of Vancian system. So you have 4 priest powers and you can use 1 a day, if you're feeling risky, you could be a sorcerer, which casts from your stamina points. You have a lot of useful spells, but then if you cast too many of them, you might, get hit by a loose arrow and a wayward arrow and die. So if you're feeling risky, you could do that. There's various skills which points by, and you can be various races, elf and dwarf, or slick or rhino man, which is also, I want to be a rhino man in my next adventure, I think. So,
I'm already halfway there.
I'm not going to ask which half.
In terms of maths.
And that's that's the system. And then, since it's an RPG, you can obviously do various other things. It's just much wide open, because in a game book you've only got a certain number of options, and if you tried to make a game book into a role-playing session, then the author would not finish the book before they died. So so you can play a wide variety of characters. You have more options. You have lots of various skills. You can be pretty much any sort of fantasy archetype you want to be. And there's also a sci-fi version with Stellar Adventures, and there's lots of other adventures. Is there anything else you want to know about it? Is there anything I've missed?
I suppose one of the things to say is that Fighting Fantasy is solo game book role playing on your own with a book and some dice, but Advanced Fighting Fantasy is the Dungeons and Dragons full-on role playing experience. So it's a system for role playing games.
I always felt that the game books, the original game books especially, were a fantastic way to get an introduction to role-playing games. It basically just laid the groundwork for when you moved in. And you'll see in many games, like the original Star Wars role-playing game from '87, they used a game book format with the rules to explain how the game worked, and that's fantastic. And in fact, I felt as well that the original Fighting Fantasy books, they managed to they snuck role-playing games onto bookshelves, like with books like Maelstrom and Dragon Warriors. When I bought Dragon Warriors, I thought it was another game book. It wasn't a role-playing game.
So did the publishers. That's how I smuggled it on.
And that's brilliant. So, Fighting Fantasy was just the perfect introduction. The basic Fighting Fantasy role-playing game, which I've got about 4 different copies of, just for relevant reasons, is brilliant, and you can use it, but there's no real longevity to it, and character progression pretty much isn't there. But it's great for little one-shots or short campaigns. Simon Barnes actually we played a game of this last year. But the Advanced Fighting Fantasy, no, the world's your oyster. You got character progression, you got loads more options, you got a more detailed systems, you can have more in-depth characters. Yeah, there is a distinct difference between the two.
Yeah, I'm actually saying that you can come full circle now, because Arian Games is working on a solo Advanced Fighting Fantasy book.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can start with Fighting Fantasy, move on to Advanced Fighting Fantasy, and then go back to playing solo games, but with Advanced Fighting Fantasy, which would be good, because because in sorcery, who hasn't wished they could, you get a flying spell in sorcery, but who hasn't wished you could just fly over the walls?
Yeah.
Is that the whole point? Get to the game over. Yeah. It's like, come on, I had a flying spell. Can't you just let me know it's a game book? We're not giving that option. So there you go. So Advanced Fighting Fantasy would have more options.
And I will say, one of the other things I've talked with, folks like Chris Bissett and some other folks from Rainy Day Co-op, who are all British solo game designers or have solo systems they've designed. Fighting Fantasy is such an influence or touchstone for them. And I at one point we were discussing kind of why do we see so many solo RPGs come out of the UK as opposed to like in the US. People are very shocked by the idea that solo games exist sometimes. Like, I'm still constantly talking to people who are like, wait, you can play a role-playing game by yourself? I'm like, yeah, for decades. Like, it's not a new thing. And so I think it's such a touchstone for a different type of play. That's just an absolute thrill to be able to do. And where like you hear the authorial voice a whole lot more than you normally do in group systems. So there's some really cool things that impact design and play that come out of that aren't even just system based. But I also love that you're about to be able to kind of loop that and go from solo play to group play back to solo play. I think is great.
It's interesting you should say that, because when we were doing the Fabled Lands, so a single storyline, well, maybe you have 2 or 3 threads, but it's the same plot line in a traditional game book. You have quite a lot more narrative and descriptive text. Purple prose, hopefully, is always the most fun for a game book. But with the Fabled Lands, we have lots and lots of short paragraphs. because there's lots of, and it's quite hard to get it down to a small size, because we wanted something that was huge and sweeping. So you have maybe 700 or 800 paragraphs in a Fabled Lands book, but and loads and loads of little quests. So each of those quests could have been a game book on their own, but because it's like an exploration of an open world, it's like Skyrim before computer games came along style of thing. It changes the way that you write. So you have to write concisely and also try and get really pithy, exciting little paragraphs to engage the reader without too much. So, you know, 1 or 2 sentences describing a castle of the Dark Lord style of stuff.
Awesome.
Of course, I was really good at that, and Dave wasn't. But you know,
and for which that style we've got to acknowledge really was
really
inspired by Eric Goldberg. The style he used in the board game Tales of the Arabian Nights. Kind of showed that if you could pack enormous numbers of quests into that sort of game book structure, and I really liked his very pithy sort of 3-sentence descriptions that really were evocative, and so that's what we were aiming for with Fabled Lands as well.
Yeah, I recently got Tales of the Arabian Nights and re-edition of the board game. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm. It's a good game.
Sam just slid off to the side there. Hopefully he's still around. I know we've been trying to get Graham in the whole time. That's why you'll see every time you see the screen shift, that's us trying to get Graham in one more time. Hopefully we can before we got pop off. But Sam, I was going to say to you, as we kind of get ready to close out, do you have any thoughts, any ideas? Are there any things that I saw in the chat you have not bid on things because you feel like as the organizer you should not? Are there any pieces that if you were going to bid on things, you would be most excited about, or that you're just kind of shocked more people have not gotten in on?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things there that haven't been bid on yet, which I'm surprised by because they're all fantastic. No, the reason I just sloped off was to actually go get my card so I can bid on the commission work, so I can get in on the raffle on that one. Because everyone in the chat's been saying you should buy something. You should buy something. No, like I say, I'm surprised John Capsalis's artwork hasn't had more on it. But there's certainly been a few people that have bid, which is fantastic. The newest one that hasn't been up the longest is the Jamie Fry little pack of books and bits down the bottom. So it'd be great if some more people went in for that. And then it's just really a case of when do we close everything down? Do I leave it open for a bit longer, or do we close it now?
Leave it open for a while. You leave it open for as long as you like. People might come back to it.
Yeah, but eventually you want to get that money. Give it to people.
Exactly.
I mean, I think giving another month, like go through the end of February, give people plenty of time to either watch this, give us time to talk about it a little bit more, and then you can I think close it out whenever you're ready. Because again, like,
well, should we say officially that we'll close it down at the end of February then?
That's totally you're the boss here. You're making the calls.
Let's set it for the last day of February.
I think that's great. We can do a little bit of a pushover on our Twitter account and some other people, to kind of get some attention to it. It's a really great collection of items. And again, for me as somebody who comes from the States, who didn't grow up with Finding Fantasy, but wish I had instead of Choose Your Own Adventure books. I'm super excited to be able to dive in on some of it also too. Somebody else has said you could also just set a target and say when you get to that target, you'll do it also too. But please hop in, folks. If you have not yet, give it a chance. Let's see if we get Graham at least by voice. Graham, can you? Are you able to get at least audio up?
Yes, I can.
Hey!
Audio at least. That's the thing I hate about living rurally. I think the storm has done a bit of damage locally. The internet's been really bad. Yesterday evening, it even blew the roof off a local cricket club last night as well. So,
where are you then?
But I'm back again.
Where are you?
So I'm up in Yorkshire.
Right,
I'm up in Yorkshire, and it was ferocious yesterday. Right. It was really, really, really windy. So I know there's quite a lot of people without power in certain areas, not far away. So at least I've got power, and at least I've got some internet.
Well, we'll send a Frenchman round, and they can burn him for heating.
Well,
Unless
EDF
you
owns
show
most
he's
of the
bought
power
the French
supply
cable
companies,
man.
so
Oh yes, already owned by the French.
most of our power supplied by France.
Yeah.
I know, Julian. Don't go anywhere these people tell you to.
Take an army
it's a
of
trap.
Scotsmen and sack York. Traditional.
Graham, why don't you tell people who you are, a little bit about your connection with Fighting Fantasy, Advanced Fighting Fantasy, Warlock Returns, and if you have any connection to mental health or the Mind Organization, we'd love to hear that also.
Okay, excellent. So I originally got into fantasy gaming a long time ago when my father brought me a copy of Citadel of Chaos. He was working away. He tended to bring a present when he came back, and he brought me that because he knew I liked reading fantasy novels, and he at that time thought it was another fantasy novel. So he turned up with his copy of Citadel of Chaos. Forest of Doom, as it happens. Forest of Doom, and I was absolutely hooked. And within a week, I had the other two books. And as soon as the next book came out, the bookshop gave me a ring, and I went down and bought it. And those really got me into fantasy gaming. And then D&D followed, and then Advanced Fighting Fantasy and Maelstrom, of course, I played a lot when I was young. And lots of other games followed on from that. And so fast forward to about 2008, I'd set up Arian Games to begin with to produce paper miniatures. And they were selling quite well. And then in about 2008, I approached Puffin about reprinting Maelstrom, which of course was published by Puffin alongside the Fighting Fantasy game books way back when. And they said yes, and I republished it and started writing some extra bits for it. And that was great. And then in about 2010, I was at a games convention with Jamie Wallace, the guy from Greywood Publishing, and he had been publishing D&D 3.5 edition versions of the Fighting Fantasy adaptation. So they'd done, I think, a couple of the sorcery books. They'd done 4 or 5 of the other game books. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'd love to reprint the original Fighting Fantasy. He said, well, I'll give you Steve's email address. You can ask him. And I thought, hey, why not? So I sent Steve an email and said, any chance of this? And he said, are you serious? And I said, yep. And after a few more discussions, he said, yep, fine, you can reprint that then. So I completely reworked the rule system to bring it in line with more of a modern feel, give it what I thought was a bit more playability, reprinted Titan, reprinted Out of the Pit, and thought, let's see how this goes.
Yeah.
And it sold really, really well. So I said, well, I want to do another book. How about the sorcery books? And he said, okay, then. So I then said, well, how about this one and this one? And I want to do this new book. And before you know it, we're up to 20, 25, 26 different books, something like that now. And there is a huge appetite now for Advanced Fighting Fantasy. And when I go to conventions, obviously not the last couple of years, but when I do go to conventions, it's not just the gamers of my era, the ones that had the Fighting Fantasy game books in the 80s that are fans of Advanced Fighting Fantasy. There are many of those, of course, and that's fantastic. But there are also lots of much younger players, new players, who weren't even born when the original Fighting Fantasy books were released. I had an email a couple of days ago from someone who was buying some extra books from the web store. And she said, thank you so much for doing these. She said, I'm running a campaign for my teenage sons and their cousins, and they're absolutely loving it. And things like that are fantastic to hear because it brings the role-playing game to a new era. But what it does is it also brings the game books to this new era as well, because those that play the game tend to then go out and buy some of the game books, and vice versa. So I think they both feed each other. And to really answer your question, these game books have been a huge part of my life for about 40 years now. And that element is something that makes me who I am and what I am. And, you know, there's a huge debt of mine to these game books. So the longer they continue, the happier I am.
That's nice.
Awesome.
It's kind of, I remember going to that last convention, and this guy turned up with his kids, and he said, I loved your books when I was 12, and now I play them with my own kids. I bought the new ones. It's sweet, but also you feel really old.
You do.
I love your books when I was a kid. Now I'm my own, and I play. Oh no.
Well, I mean, all four of my children play role-playing games, and my son, who's now 11, actually wrote one of the AFF supplements. I helped him with layout, and you know, we commissioned the art and so on. But he did the vast majority of the writing for it, and he's absolutely over the moon with doing that, because he feels now part of Fighting Fancy, a small part of Fighting Fancy, and I think that's great.
That's part of the book bundle that you've provided.
Yeah, and it's the feeling involved, I think, that is good as well. And obviously, when I was that age, getting involved was a letter to Warlock magazine, and that was about as close as you could get to actually being involved in the franchise. And I think now with you know, with games that are streamed or put on YouTube, with people posting their own adventures, all of this sort of thing means that the community is much bigger and a lot more visible than I think it ever was, and that can only ever be a good thing. Yeah,
it's also interesting because I got, between us, Dave and I must have done, I don't know, 60 game books or something. But sort of for part of it, there's been this big retro revival recently in the last 10 or 15 years, and for I don't know about Dave, but definitely for me, it's been very. I'm not quite sure what the word is. It's sort of comforting, I suppose, in one's old age. To think that you've just written a whole bunch of fantasy stories, and how much they've actually influenced a whole bunch of people in all sorts of different ways.
I particularly like the guy got in touch with me, and he teaches English as a foreign language in Japan, and he was saying he was using Heart of Ice, and his students really enjoyed it. And you think it's great to think something you've written is reaching out and it's inspiring or entertaining people, and that some little thing that they think for the rest of the, I think of the stuff that I loved as a kid, like Marvel Comics and Doctor Who, and that becomes part of you for the rest of your life. And so as a writer, when you do something like that and you think, I've shared something of my imagination with all these other people, and they will carry that with them, and it will
maybe it was worth it after all.
They do, yeah.
After all the pain.
That camera's finally working.
Hey!
So you got the camera working as well.
By the way, Graham, what was that symbol you have when your camera was off? It's driving me mad. Is it Klingon?
No, that's OBS Studio. So I use that to record videos, and there's a virtual camera. You can basically put like a screen as a webcam.
Right.
And so for some reason my webcam itself wasn't being recognized, so it reverts to the virtual webcam.
But what was the symbol on it? Could you see it?
That's the OBS.
OBS.
Sort of, yeah,
it looks like something something from a game, like a evil corporation, Resident Evil or something.
It's their sort of logo. That's the OBS Studio logo.
Maybe OBS is run by Klingons.
Maybe it is. God, I mean, we all thought it was just a TV show. Klingons are real? Oh my God.
Yeah, they're off the starboard bow.
I knew it. I knew they were real.
No, but it is great to hear. Like I said, like some of my favorite designers, and actually, like we are just launching like later today our first stream. We've got a new creator who's coming onto our channel named Armanda. She's down in Argentina, but she's a solo game designer. And she's going to be doing just little actual plays of solo games just by herself, and then sitting down and talking with the creators. But there's so many designers who I know in the solo scene, like I said, who Fighting Fantasy was their start playing games. Evelyn, who is one of my favorite designers, not necessarily in a solo context, but just generally as far as art and game design. They were just saying that's where they got where she got her start in the scene. So like it's had such, like I said, outside of the US for really bizarre reasons, has had such a huge impact traditionally, and now in the US it's really great to see designers discovering them for the first time or finding out about the system through, you know, there's a lot of those revival pieces that you were talking about, Jamie, that they're absolutely in love with. And I think one of the best things. Oh, go ahead. I think one of the best things we can do oftentimes is to like think about, again, especially for mental health specifically, is think about how we offer other designers or other players the ability to come into that same space. So, you know, Graham talking about having your son come in and being able to do cross-generational design. Like, I love when I can hire my kids to do art for a game because they're really gifted artists, and I get to work with them on some projects, and it's just tremendous fun. I know one of them will want to do writing eventually.
Maybe I shouldn't have sold my children after all. It's too late now.
But no, there's a lot of tremendous things that come out of that community, and again, that's like you know, one of the kind of classic sayings for mental health is if you write the word illness and you write the word wellness down, the differences between I and we, like the trying to do things together versus trying to do things alone, is incredibly it makes an incredible difference in how healthy we are able to how healthily we're able to maintain our own mental well-being, as well as the support systems we have in place for that. So again, just want to remind people, if you're able to, please go help support either through the auction or through direct gift. And I've dropped those links in chat again just a second ago, to go support Mind through those two great things. Again, this auction will be up for about another month, and before we close it off, and we'll make sure we get some good publicity for it before then. But please go support in any way that you can. I know we just got Graham on, but also my pieces are all kinds of messed up right now on the back end. So rather than trying to fix them one more time, we've been on for about an hour and a half. I want to just kind of go around and give everybody a chance to say, just remind people who they are, where folks can find you. But also, again, if you have something that you really want to say to people to encourage them to support Mind or to take care of themselves, or in regards to kind of diving into Fighting Fantasy and discovering some of the beautiful things that you've found there that have helped you, I'd love to hear that. We'll save Graham for last so that he can say as much as he wants to. But let's actually start. Sam, you helped organize this. You helped put all this together. Also, we've had Simon on the entire time, just sitting there silently, so everybody can see Simon's S now. Simon is under the weather, but I'm glad they were here with us the entire time also too. But Sam, why don't you tell people again a little bit more about the Warlock returns and kind of what initially spurred the fundraising that we're doing right now?
Sure. Well, I mean, the Warlock Returns is just a little fan-based magazine, a fanzine almost, written for and art by the Fighting Fantasy and advanced Fighting Fantasy fans out there. I do the hard slog of pulling it all together into a magazine, which I hope people enjoy. Just finished our fifth edition, which Graham, I don't know if you've had the proof copy back yet, but should hopefully be live as a print copy. Cool. So hopefully once we've checked that over, that will be live. Although the PDF's out there at the moment. But yeah, everyone that I've spoken to has enjoyed what we've done so far. So I just want to do a public thank you to all of my writers and artists for continuing to send me stuff that I then battle with to get into a magazine. I love Advanced Fighting Fantasy because it's a simple game. You can just sit down and play. You don't have to prep, and the rules don't get in the way of the roleplay, which is fantastic. Ironically, I only just bought my first 2 fighting fantasy books within the last few months. So I'm also one of those that completely skipped over fighting fantasy. I knew about it, but
There's a lot of heretics here.
There are, but my first game book was
burnings.
actually Asterix.
All right, cool.
Ah,
So that was my into roleplay game. But yeah, as for the charity, anything that anyone can either donate or bid on for raffle or auction would be fantastic. We're already up to £589, which is absolutely brilliant. Blown my expectations away.
Well done.
awesome.
Pity
But
only
we get-
£9 of that goes to mine, and the rest of it goes to me. I've
Oh,
just
you
hacked
run
it.
this. You run the card donation company, then, okay?
Well, I've
Good
hacked
to know.
it actually. Yeah, I've just hacked it. So,
Awesome. Let's hop over
yeah.
to Dave. Dave, do you want to remind people who you are, where they can find your stuff, but also any last thoughts you have about mental health or about the system we've been talking about today?
I guess I've done a bunch of game books and role-playing games, particularly Dragon Warriors. If people looking for me today, I have a Patreon page, which is Jewel Spider. That's Jewel and Spider, all one word, which is a kind of return to Dragon Warriors in a kind of unplugged way. Sam, you were just saying about role-playing games where the rules don't get in the way of the role-playing, and that the idea behind Jewel Spider is to have a very fluid, conversational style of play. Jamie and I have just, or are currently doing a bunch of open world game books set in the Vulcanverse. So if anybody's interested in seeing what we do these days as our powers decline and our brains begin to rot, they can take a look at those. They're kind of the open world structure of Fabled Lands, but rather more forgiving. We don't kill people off every 20 paragraphs, or if we do, they get to come back to life very quickly.
I've still had a lot of fun writing death paragraphs. So.
Yeah, but this time it's not. Death isn't forever.
Yeah. It's more Xbox than Nintendo, is the way we call it.
And I think
I
guess I don't really have a lot of experience about mental health, or do I mean mental ill health? Anyway, it's obviously a very serious issue. I think one of the things I found good is role playing, because you get to explore different kinds of aspects of your personality, and by maybe exorcising them, they don't sit inside and fester. At least that's my theory about it. I remember a friend of mine said that his weekly role-playing session was what kept him sane. And I think, whatever, any imaginative, shared, fun experience you can do can be a great way to keep balance and mindfulness. But I'm no expert, so I'll pass it over to you.
Don't forget the Fabled Lands blogspot.
Yes, we have a Fabled Lands blog, and people can come to that. It used to be a great little conversational area, but we had to close off comments because we started getting trolled crazily. So unfortunately now it's people can just pop over and see what the latest things are, and we keep that's where we put all our news of what we're up to.
And we have a little company called Fabled Lands LLP, and we've been republishing our Fabled Lands game books and
in Italian and French and German as well.
Yeah, it's a French for you, Julianne, a French Fabled Lands map.
Oh, that's beautiful.
To try and encourage you to get the books or die. Sorry,
So
encourage, I mean threaten with death. Is that the French one? Oh no, those are the ones we've got on.
And it's an Italian company, Tambu, which is turning.
By Alconost? Is it Alconost?
Yeah. Yes, right? They've done. I don't know if I've got any lying around.
So okay.
No. And there's a German Manticore have done the German Fabled Lands.
Yeah. And Blood Sword.
Actually, up there I've got a Dark Lord kids books. I've got a French Dark Lord. It's called Au Démon au Collège.
Another game book series I did called Blood Sword is being turned into a 5e campaign by an Italian company called Tambu. So that's another little thing, which is interesting because a lot of Blood Sword kind of arose. I mean, it's not actually parts of our Dragon Warriors campaigns, but there are player characters who appear as incidental NPCs, and some of the strands from our Dragon Warriors campaigns were kind of co-opted into Bloodsword. So it's interesting to see it being turned back into a role-playing game.
Awesome. We're going to hop over to Stuart real quick. Stuart, tell people who you are, where they can find you. I know you got to hop off in just a second. Also, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, no, it's been great. Yeah. So I'm Stuart Lloyd. So I started a blog called Lloyd of Gamebooks about, 11 years ago. So there we go. Yeah, that's terrible. How old I am. So, but I love fighting fantasy. I got my first book when I was 7. I got the first edition of Advanced Fighting Fantasy when I was 11. I loved what Graham did with the second edition, opened up loads more options and everything. I've written some Advanced Fighting Fantasy stuff, which I've linked to on my blog and everything. And I didn't mention this first time around, but I'm running a game book competition called the Lindenbaum competition, which the deadline is sort of midnight on the 1st of February. So if you have an unpublished short game book of 100 sections or less lying around, then send it over to the Lindenbaum competition. You might win some money for it. If you haven't, then have a look at the game books and vote on them in February and early March. There are currently 10, so there's plenty of reading to be done. And I love the idea of donating money to mental health, because I've had some times when my mental health has not been great. Sort of when I was doing my A-levels, basically, it was kind of a combination of sort of didn't have very much money to get along, and also I was taking some medication, which one of the side effects was depression, so that sort of had an effect. And I was very silly. I just thought I should just get on with it, which was, in retrospect, a sort of really bad idea, because it sort of had a knock-on effect later on. So I think it's really important that if we feel like something bad's going on, then we should talk about it. So it's quite hard to talk about, but it's worth it in the end. That's what I've discovered. So so it's definitely good to support Mind. And and also sort of game books and sort of role playing has helped me through that a lot, because it was a sort of way to escape and just for a bit into a more pleasant land where I got to kill lots of things and possibly be killed, but somehow that was better. And like Dave says about writing so much times being an outlet and letting it out, I've realized that writing some books sometimes lets it out like that. So I've just written a book about a dystopian 2041 and felt a lot better when I finished it. So
the way things are going, it'll be 2031.
Well, yes.
2023.
Yeah, I'll have to update it. I'll just stick some dates in as it goes along. But
your jungle items for the magazine is very much welcome every time.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Getting near the end of that little mine.
You'll have to give me something else to write, and then I'll let the creativity flow, and then feel a lot better for it. But so I wrote the jungle bits for the Warlock Return. So there we go. So that's me. I've got to go, I'm afraid, but it's been great being here.
Thank you for being
How
here
old
with
is
us.
your boy?
An absolute pleasure.
Oh, my
Boy's
God,
birthday, is it?
It's my son. He was 7. He was 7 at the beginning
cool.
of January, but it's like the first party he's had for he missed last year's. No, it's 2022 now, isn't it? Yeah, he missed 2 years.
We're nearly old enough to buy him a Dark Lord book.
Well, yeah, there we go.
Very smooth.
Yes, Dark Lord, the teenage years being the first one.
I'll get that. He's sort of slowly going into game books. He sort of had these ones where you sort of answer questions about science and he turns the page. He didn't, So, and Beast Quest. He's done the Beast Quest game book so far. So it's a slippery slope. It's like one day we'll open up the box and I'll show him the whole world of game books he can explore. So,
Awesome.
So excellent.
Stuart, thanks so much again.
Nice time.
That's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you all.
Cheers,
Thanks very much. Live long and prosper. So,
Cheers, Lloyd of Game Books.
Thanks.
Jamie,
Bye-bye.
why don't you remind people who you are and where they can find you online?
I'm the greatest living author of all time. Possibly.
Just type that in. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe not. I'm the greatest living author in this house. All right, in this room. And I've done a hell of a lot of game books, I suppose.
Do you mean this virtual room or that one room that you're actually in with the mad clown behind you?
The Mad Clown is a better writer than I am.
Yeah.
I have to put his mask on to really do some stuff.
And where's your
Demon
cake,
Knight.
by the way? Where did the cake ever arrive? Because we need
No,
to...
I have cake after this.
Oh, I see. It wasn't coming during.
Wife has been out foraging for cake successfully. But yes, I sort of started, my first game book was 1984, and it was the Talisman of Death. Because I used to work for Games Workshop.
Come on. Talisman of Death.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Oh,
I'm getting it right. Talisman of Death. And interestingly, my friend and I, Mark Smith, we wrote a bunch of books together. We wrote that first book in longhand, in pencil. And we did, because in those days there weren't even word processors. Well, not affordable ones. We couldn't afford a typewriter.
Chiseled into
And in the
stone,
end-
wasn't it?
What? Yeah. With this just so Neolithic game book, and so old. And then, but finally, we managed to get to use Ian Livingston's word processor in his office. Because I worked
At a
there.
reasonable fee.
No, he didn't actually charge, amazingly.
Oh,
But
he didn't know you were
I
doing
think the word processing system that they got in cost £20,000 in 1982 or something. It was only like 3 or 4 monitors, and I just had an electric typewriter. And then we went on to like the Atari ST, and then the BBC Micro, and finally I got a PC that I bought for £2,500 in 1990, a 30 meg hard drive, and a 16 megahertz processor, and 2 meg of RAM, and that was incredibly expensive and powerful. And now, God, I don't even know what I've got. A machine is so powerful that I need for games. But anyway, in the 90s, I had some serious mental health issues, very bad depression and physical depression. It was really quite bad. But one of the things that did help was role playing with Dave. We played a lot of Empire: The Petal Throne. So to sit around with my friends and stab them in the back was a really good way to
therapeutic
way.
I think you'll agree.
What?
Single malt whiskey. I highly recommend.
Oh yes, there was a lot of whiskey. That probably wasn't that good for my mental health, but but the role playing really does help. It is quite therapeutic in many ways, and even playing on your own with a game book or a solo board game or whatever it might be can help with the escapism to take your mind off one's problems. At the end of the day, my circumstances changed, and I got a new job, and various things were able to help me out of it.
And actually, that does make me
ask
think
for
of
much
something.
help, as Stuart was saying, which I should have done.
It does make me think of something else, which is because I said not having a lot of experience in mental health, but that another thing is that people who don't have those problems need to be aware. Because I remember when Jamie was depressed, and it's very hard for the rest of us, to understand when he would say things like he just didn't feel like coming to a game, and whether you should push him or let him have some space. And it's, other people need to be aware that it's a condition people can't control, can't help. They may not really be able to explain it to you. And so everybody can help. It's not just people who actually have mental health issues, but everyone else can help.
Yeah, and it probably didn't help when Dave would use an electro cattle prod to get me to do things. All right. Stick pins in my voodoo doll. Yeah, well, those are hard times for me. Excuse me for a moment, I've just got cramp in my leg. I'm so glad I managed not to swear really badly publicly. I was about to do the MF word. Sorry about that. I went for a really long walk yesterday, and I haven't been doing it for a while, so it's knackered my muscles.
A paragon of so many things, self-control among them.
Yeah. I must drink more blood of children to regenerate.
That was me sticking another pin in the voodoo doll, by the way.
Yes, of course. Damn it. That voodoo doll is covered in so many pin sticks. But yeah, so Mind is an important charity. That's kind of what we're here for, really. Well, I am. It's a good one.
Awesome. Help. And thank you so much for being here with us. Julian, let's go to you next. Tell people where they can find your work and if you have any final thoughts.
Okay, so me compared to all these people, they're really a nobody. So I'm not too sure you can find me anywhere online. But this said, the main point for me to be here was Scripterium, so the company that translates the the amazing work from Graham for Arian Game. And I've just done a few articles in the Warlock Returns. Most of them was translation of Scriptarium, some of the extra rules that they've done. What I wanted to do, though, if that's okay, is to ask a couple of questions. I'm a big fan of Stellar Adventure by Jonathan Hicks, and I was wondering if there was anything else coming up, campaign-wise, or any extra books.
Well, there was. It is something I'm still working on. I remember speaking to Graham about this last year, and I was doing a source book for the Astro Navy, the organisation in Starship Traveller, which goes against the grain slightly. Is one of my favourite game books. But I was going to do a source book for that and do a setting, what have you. Unfortunately, my own game, Those Dark Places, went into sort of very quick production, and that kind of took over all my time. But once things settled down for me, and I've got a couple of contracts, I've got a couple of other projects to finish, then yeah, that is something I'm going to be continuing in the future.
Okay. And I just wanted to check as well, with your knowledge of fighting fantasy, you know that Black Sand has been described in quite a lot of details in the Titan world. Do you know if there are any information setting-wise for the city of Salamonis? Do you know if anything exists? Because it's quite an important city in the fighting fantasy world, and a couple of people were asking me about it, and they were asking me to ask, knowledgeable people. Do you know of anything that exists?
Yeah, there is actually a part written source book for Salamonis.
Oh wow!
But it was being done in conjunction with completely my memory's fading. I'm getting old. It was being done in conjunction with the cartographer, and someone will remind me of his name in a moment, who did a lot of the fighting fantasy maps. Unfortunately, I completely lost. That's it. Yep, completely lost track with him. But and unfortunately, I have no way of getting in contact with him. But we did do a lot of sample maps. Well, not sample maps, certain illustrations, and it was very much a project between us because of the way he approached mapping in a very realistic way. And so there's no point putting a street there if that one's there, and so on and so forth. So that then ended up moving down the priority list, and as anyone who knows me knows, I have quite a crowded life. I've got something like 9 RPG books that I'm working on at any one time.
Wow.
And 2 other businesses. And this morning I was off doing rugby coaching, and then in the summer I do cricket coaching, and I'm a parish councillor, and I'm on a couple of DEFRA advisory boards, and so there's an awful lot going on. And what I would say is, if it's something that is of interest, email me.
Definitely.
And keep emailing me, because the more email hassle I get, the more emails I get saying please do this, the further up my production line it goes.
Okay.
I'll just note down Graham Botley's susceptible to threats
and harassment,
and blackmail and bullying.
Yeah, unfortunately, it has to be people making me feel guilty almost, because there is so much on and there are so many books that if I've got 2 or 3 people emailing me every few days about a particular book, it ends up being prioritized and it gets finished. Whereas if someone says, "Oh, have you thought about that book?" and then doesn't come back to me again, it ends up being pushed down my priority. So
note to self, make a dozen emails.
Yeah,
yes. Demanding money.
Too well. If you need something, just keep emailing, and keep emailing, and it will end up being a priority.
While I think about it, Graham, are you heading to fighting fantasy this year, and do you want a sidekick?
I will be. I haven't heard anything about the details yet of it, but yes, I will definitely be going.
Yeah, I'm
And
going.
yes, the more the
Well, I'm
merrier.
going as long as the plague is gone a bit. I have to be careful
Well,
being
yeah.
But I'm hoping to persuade Dave to go, and we'll do a talk on the Vulcanverse. It's Jonathan Green's
Well, I'm
already.
doing my best with the pandemic as well. So
Very hard to get to go to the convention because he doesn't really like humans. Prefers the company of his own kind on the planet Skaro.
Awesome.
Which is the planet of the Daleks, in case anyone doesn't.
And then Jonathan, why don't you tell people where they can find you if you have any final thoughts?
Plenty of final thoughts. I'll try and condense it. Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I am on Twitter under John Mark Hicks, but I mainly do promotional stuff there. Final thoughts. Well, Fighting Fantasy was my introduction to gaming. It was my introduction to game books and role playing in general. And one of the things I did love about it, and as well about the Advanced Fighting Fantasy system, is its simplicity and how easy it is to run. It's very intuitive. You can use dice that are lying around the house, or any way of generating a random number between 1 and 6. It's dead easy to get into, and it's very, very familiar as well. There's something very, very familiar about the fantasy setting, which is what made it attractive to me. I also started my love of simple systems as well, sort of rules light. So when I got into games design, I started off very complicated. So I remember when I used to play Rollmaster, so I used to,
Jesus, Rollmaster.
And I know 6 hours to create a character, and he died in the first 15 minutes of the game. What a waste of time.
Did you ever come across Chivalry and Sorcery?
Yeah. And I had more luck with Merp because somebody else created the character for me. But it sort of got me into rules light, and that's when I wrote those Dark Places. I wanted to invoke that kind of familiar atmosphere and the way it was written, as well as that lovely sort of narrative. Instead of just being a dry pages of words and instructions, I wanted it to sort of give its own sort of feeling. So when I got into games design, I started off complicated and realised, Rollmaster, hooray! And then I realised that I didn't need to be complicated. So I went back to my roots, which was Fighting Fantasy, and went back to rules light. And that's where I am at the moment. I talk a lot about my own games, to be fair, which is those Dark Places, the Osprey games, and I've just written another one called Fire Team, which is for science fiction military sort of scenario, sort of like Starship Troopers, Hammer and Slammers, and that sort of thing, which I've just released under the OGL. So the game's out there. You're quite welcome to take the system, the High Five system, and do whatever you want with it, and release it for your own benefit and profit, with no royalties, which is good fun. As far as mental health is concerned, yeah, I've had a lot of issues. Nothing too detrimental. I think I'm lucky as far as mental health issues are concerned. I did have a very troubled childhood, so things like Fighting Fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, Tolkien, Star Wars, that's what I gravitated to because it's a way to escape. But then I kind of realised in later life I spent far too much time running away from it. So like Tony was saying earlier about illness and wellness, I realised that it wasn't just about me. I can run away as much as I want, but I can't outrun my own head. So talk to someone. Just find someone to speak to. Find a professional, find a friend, and you don't have to spill your guts straight away. Just take it step by step, whatever's comfortable for you. And I think what Dave said was fantastic as well. When you're friends with somebody who's feeling that way, and I've been friends with a lot of people who are feeling that way, it's, you don't want to push them. So just make sure that they know that you're there for them, but respect their boundaries. That's pretty much all you can do. And and that's basically it. Charities like mine are absolutely fantastic with this sort of stuff, because what we need to generate is awareness, and I don't think there's enough of that at all. And when people speak to it, people are very dismissive, thinking about, it's just a bit mad, and that doesn't help anybody, even the person saying it. If they're dismissive,
I have to admit, I am a bit mad. But
apart from Jamie. Yeah. But if you do say somebody's a bit mad, you're not only dismissing it because of how they are, you're dismissing it from yourself as well, as if you're ignoring it. You're ignoring your own problems as well as theirs. So there's no shame in it as well. There's no shame in talking about what's troubling you. So this has been an absolute honour for me, not only just to come here and support the charity, but to speak to all these fine, famous people as well. So I've had a great time. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And Graham, I promised you, final words since we were able to get you on here. So would love to hear a little bit more about your work. And again, if you have any final thoughts on mental health or fighting fantasy.
Yep. So very briefly, I've been involved in Fighting Fantasy game books since I was about 8 or 9 or so. And they've been a huge part of my life. In the early days as enjoyment, And then latter days, of course, still enjoyment, because I love writing the games, I love producing the games, but also work, because it does take up a lot of my time now. But what is fantastic is the number of people who email me, who I talk to at conventions, and they say, we love playing the game, it gives us so much joy. And that, I think, is what makes it worthwhile for me. And I work on lots of different ranges. I've got the Maelstrom range, lots of books there. I've got, the Advanced Fantasy books. I've got various other games going on. And I think what I love most about producing the games is the fact that people are playing them and enjoying them. And I imagine the other creators here are going to feel the same way. You yes, it's a job. Yes, you're producing things. And yes, people are paying you for said product. But that product is bringing people joy. That people is bringing people enjoyment. And I think you are sort of you're doing some good as well as just making a living. And that really is a huge motivator for me, the fact people enjoy it. And I've been lucky. I've never suffered from any mental health issues myself, but I do have friends who have, and it can be absolutely devastating. And although my main working life has been in medical research, I was a big part of the research towards getting rid of cervical cancer with human papillomavirus vaccines. That's almost a visible type of disease, whereas mental illness is an invisible type of disease. It doesn't show. You can't detect it. You can't have a scan and it says, yes, you have this prognosis. And, several people have said, talking about it is the only way to ever make that diagnosis. And once the diagnosis is made, you can then start making progress against it. And I think charities like mine are fantastic, because until you've got the awareness of something like that, you can't do anything about it. So absolutely honored to be involved as well.
Awesome.
Oh, and as for online presence, I do have a Twitter account. I'm sometimes on Facebook when I remember to get on there. I do have a website which desperately needs updating, but I'm on. It's one of my jobs to do. Point. So I can be sort of found in various places, but all good.
Awesome.
Can I just add a little point about the magnificence? This kind of leaves out Sam and me, but the magnificence of the beards assembled here.
Nobody's going to beat Tony Finder's beard. I'm sorry.
It's it's a brand habit that we just have really amazing beards. We're totally open to anybody with a bare face also too, or scraggly beards as well.
Yeah. I'm quite impressed with Dave's very well trimmed beard.
Yes,
and I particularly like Tony's.
I was described actually not long ago as a silver fox by somebody I know.
No, that you just misheard the word fox. Who's that Texan band of the 80s and 90s where they all had the beards?
ZZ Top.
ZZ Top, of course. Tony's perhaps as ZZ Top.
I appreciate it. And I appreciate all y'all coming on today. I appreciate Sam for reaching out. It took a lot to actually get to the state. We had a couple dates set. We pushed back. We moved around. I got
House
COVID
moving.
at one
Don't do
point. Simon, who has been here in spirit and been listening in on our call the whole time, is down with it right now, but has been popping me links the entire time. I'm super grateful to them. Please, if you are able to, if you catch this over the next little bit, make sure you go to the link down in the bottom corner, ttrpg.link/mind, to donate directly. Again, there's also the charity auction too. We'll make sure both of those links are available in the description to this video too. I also want to let everybody know about a couple upcoming things. We talked a lot about solo games as part of this conversation. We are just starting our new solo actual play series and review. It's called Alone with Armanda. It's Armanda sitting down and playing a game for a little while, and then sitting down with the creator of that game and then talking about it. Today we're talking about a solo mothership RPG piece that Alfred Valley, who's also from the UK, is doing. So this is going to be our first one, and we'll have 3 people from 3 continents, because I'll be running tech on the call as as Armando gets comfortable with that. But Armando's going to play for about an hour, talk with Sam for about 30 minutes, and then we'll be done with that. And then Amanda will have a review video coming up later. But that game is coming to Zine Month, which is a major grassroots event that's going to be happening all throughout February. And so you can join us right back here for that. Just hit subscribe wherever you're watching to get notified when we go live with that. Also right now, though I'd rather you give money to this charity, if you got some extra ducats, you can go to ttrpg.link/TTV and help us with our beta funding of Through the Void, which is our minimalist space RPG based on the Together We Go system, which is a really great system created by Marcus Linder and Amendment and myself to help folks do kind of creative generative work together and have player facing minimalist rules at the table, but we're throwing it into the inky blackness of space instead of down into the dungeons this time around. So please check that out, along with the work of all these great creators. And again, more than anything, I think all of us, if today you were going to make a choice on one place you were going to give some money, rather than any of us, go to that link, ttrpg.link/mind, and contribute there. We'll always have more games coming out. We'll always be excited for you to come support them. But there are people who need mental health services and support right now, and to help generate more awareness, that's really where we would love to see your money going. So with that said, it's been an honor to have y'all on. It's been great to talk more about this. I'm always excited to talk about fighting fantasy because it's something I came to so late, and because there's just such tremendous ways that it's impacted the indie design space, as well as the British and American OSR experiences. And so thank you all for the work that you do and for making great games. I will say, even though no one can see me, so I should stop talking because it's boring when you can't see the person who's talking, I do have I have a number of friends who are mental health professionals, and one of them did leave me with a stat that there are plenty of people, about a third of people who are having mental health issues need someone who is a professional to sit with them, to chat with them, to support them. A lot of people who are having them are really just in need of friends and companionships. About another third, and about another third need some sort of support, professional support, but it might be remote, it might be through self-work or book work or other things like that. So there are a lot of ways to do that, but we can't underestimate that a lot of us really just need, no matter who you are within that, you need those communities of support to come around you, and make sure that at your table, you're not just concerned about what's happening at your campaign, you're concerned about what's happening in the lives of the other people around you, and that you're aware of the human experiences they're going through, so that you can support them in whatever way is going to be most helpful. So with that said, we're gonna pop off in just 1 second, except for I'm looking at the chat right now. We're currently we're right under 100 pounds on Just Giving. We're right under 600 pounds on the auction site. Man, it'd be great if in the next hour we saw things push those over each of those marks, the 600 mark and the $100 mark on each one. So please go check that out. We're going to run those through the end of February. Sam's going to before we close them out. So we'll make sure we get a little bit more time to push those numbers up and over. But thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. And let's all just wave at the screen until I put up a title graphic, and we don't have to do that anymore.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Quick, my hands are getting hurt.
It's been